Some people lie about their age, some lie on a resume. And then there are the historical lunatics who looked at their entire life and said, "No, let's replace the whole thing." Fake princes, fake survivors, fake geniuses, fake saints, fake nations, fake identities so bold they fooled courts, kings, armies, banks, and sometimes the entire world. These are 32 historical figures who lied about their entire lives, and somehow, a few of them almost got away with it. 1. In the late 1940s, Los Angeles television viewers met a silent, hypnotic musician in a jeweled turban who looked like he had just stepped out of some royal palace in New Delhi. He called himself Korla Pandit, and his act was pure early TV sorcery. No talking, just intense eye contact with the camera while playing organ and piano like a man with 4 secret hands. Audiences were told he came from an Indian musical dynasty, and they ate it up. He became a television star before Liberace fully became Liberace. But after his death in 1998, journalist R.J. Smith revealed the real story. Korla Pandit was John Roland Redd, an African-American musician from St. Louis. In segregated 1940s America, that identity could shut doors fast. So he built a new one, wrapped it in silk, and fooled show business for over 50 years. 2. Around 1600, a man walked into Polish political circles with a claim so dangerous it might as well have come with a lit fuse. He said he was Dmitry Ivanovich, the supposedly dead youngest son of Ivan the Terrible. The real Dmitry had died in 1591 as a child, very likely murdered. But this stranger insisted he had escaped and was now ready to reclaim Russia. Polish nobles loved the idea because nothing says regional stability like installing your own suspicious miracle prince next door. Somehow, it worked. With a small army and enough Russian support, he became Tsar in 1605. Then he immediately annoyed the wrong people by favoring Polish habits, marrying a Polish Catholic woman, and eating veal, which many Russians considered sinful. The boyars killed him, burned him, stuffed his ashes into a cannon, and fired him toward Poland. Russia does not do subtle rejection. 3. In 1866, a butcher named Arthur Orton arrived in England from Australia and announced that he was Roger Tichborne, the missing heir to one of Britain's richest aristocratic families. There was just one tiny problem. Roger had been slim, elegant, French-speaking, and polished. Orton was heavy-set, rough, spoke no French, and could barely remember basic details about the family estate he was supposedly born to inherit. A less emotional audience might have noticed the whole wrong man in every possible category issue. But Roger's elderly mother desperately wanted her lost son back, so she accepted him. What followed was a legal circus that gripped Britain and became the longest English trial of its time, running nearly 300 days. Witnesses came from multiple countries, newspapers feasted on the drama, and Orton was eventually convicted of perjury. He got 14 years in prison, but also fame, books, plays, and even a Borges story. Not bad for a failed aristocrat cosplay. 4. Frederick Bourdon, a Frenchman known as the Chameleon, claimed he had taken on more than 500 fake identities, which is less a resume and more a warning label. His most disturbing stunt happened in 1997, when he convinced a Texas family that he was Nicholas Barkley, their son who had vanished 3 years earlier at age 13. Bourdon was 23. He had brown eyes instead of Nicholas's blue eyes. He spoke with a thick French accent. He looked nothing like the missing boy. This was not a subtle disguise. This was a red flag wearing another red flag as a hat. Yet the family accepted him and brought him home. He lived with them for months until an investigator noticed the obvious eye color problem and contacted the FBI. Bourdon later admitted to impersonating missing children across countries, sometimes across ethnic backgrounds, using little more than confidence in other people's grief. His story became the documentary The Impostor, and somehow the most frightening question is not how he fooled them, but why they let themselves be fooled. 5. Lola Montez exploded into 1840s Europe as a wild Spanish dancer with dark hair, dramatic energy, and enough scandal to power a small theater district. She performed across the continent, charmed powerful men, and eventually conquered the attention span of King Ludwig I of Bavaria. Ludwig was so dazzled that he gave her a palace, a noble title, Countess of Landsfeld, and a very comfortable allowance. Then Lola started interfering in Bavarian politics, pushing appointments, angering the church, irritating the aristocracy, and basically speedrunning a constitutional crisis in fancy dresses. Her influence became so controversial that it helped fuel the 1848 revolution, which forced Ludwig to abdicate. And the best part? Lola Montez was not Spanish. She was Eliza Gilbert from Ireland. The accent, the backstory, the fiery Spanish identity, all theater. She simply realized that mysterious Spanish dancer sold better than ambitious Irish woman from County Sligo. Annoyingly, she was completely correct. 6. In 1920, a woman was pulled from a Berlin canal after what appeared to be a suicide attempt. For weeks, she would not identify herself. Then she made a claim that turned her into an international obsession. She said she was Grand Duchess Anastasia, youngest daughter of Tsar Nicholas II, somehow alive after the Romanov family's execution in 1918. The world knew her as Anna Anderson, and for 6 decades, she became the most famous Anastasia claimant on Earth. Some Romanov relatives believed her. Others took one look and said absolutely not. German courts argued over the case for years without giving a clean answer. Anderson later married an American history professor, moved to Virginia, and kept insisting until her death in 1984. DNA testing in the 1990s finally ended the mystery. She was not Anastasia. She was Franziska Szankowska, a Polish factory worker who had suffered a breakdown. But by then, the legend had already conquered books, movies, stage plays, and the animated Anastasia. The fake princess lost in court, but won in pop culture. 7. One British man in the early 20th century looked at fine dining and apparently thought, what if I simply did not pay? His solution was beautifully lazy and weirdly effective. He became Prince Constantine of Albania, dressed with just enough royal flair, and walked into London's best restaurants expecting to be treated like foreign nobility. And because people are ridiculous around titles, it worked. Waiters bowed. Managers found excellent tables. Champagne appeared. Dinner arrived. The bill, mysteriously, lost the courage to enter the room. This was not a grand scheme with fake passports, forged seals, or an army of assistants. It was just one confident man relying on Britain's ancient fear of embarrassing itself in front of someone who might be important. His real name was far less glamorous, and the act collapsed only when someone finally checked whether Albania had a Prince Constantine. It did not. But for a while, this man weaponized posture, clothing, and social awkwardness into free dinner. 8. On May 26, 1828, a teenage boy staggered into Nuremberg, Germany, barely able to walk and carrying a letter for the captain of a cavalry regiment. He barely spoke, seemed frightened of sunlight, and could only give one name, Kaspar Hauser. The letter claimed he had spent his life imprisoned in a dark cell, which is exactly the kind of story 19th century Europe could not resist. Nuremberg took him in, newspapers spread the tale, and Kaspar became a continent-wide mystery. People called him the Child of Europe. Was he an abused orphan? A fraud? A hidden prince from the House of Baden, locked away so someone else could inherit power? Scholars, doctors, nobles, and gossip addicts all joined the debate. In 1833, Kaspar was found with a fatal stab wound and claimed a stranger had attacked him. He died 3 days later. His grave calls him the riddle of his time, born unknown and dead mysteriously. Nearly 2 centuries later, the label still works. 9. In 1993, a 32-year-old Scottish man named Brian McKinnon did what most adults only see in anxiety dreams. He went back to high school. At Bearsden Academy near Glasgow, he introduced himself as Brandon Lee. A 16-year-old Canadian student dyed his hair blonde and somehow walked straight into classrooms where nobody recognized him. Not former teachers, not students, nobody. And this is where the story gets truly absurd. As Brandon Lee, he became one of the best students in his year, crushed his exams, and won a place at Dundee University's medical school, the dream he claimed had been unfairly taken from him years earlier. He even attended university for a full year before a newspaper exposed the truth. McKinnon said he only wanted another chance at medicine, which is both tragic and completely insane. The documentary, My Old School, covers the case. And yes, it is exactly as strange as a 32-year-old teenager sounds. 10. In 1817, a strange young woman arrived in Almondsbury, England, speaking a language nobody recognized and behaving as if ordinary British life were a baffling alien ritual. She wore unusual clothes, refused normal food, and confused local officials so thoroughly that they summoned linguists, sailors, and assorted experts to decode her. Eventually, a Portuguese sailor claimed he understood her and announced that she was Princess Caribou from an island called Javasu in the Indian Ocean. England immediately lost its mind. Rich families invited her to dinner, newspapers printed dramatic stories, and everyone enjoyed having a mysterious exotic princess conveniently appear in the countryside. Then, a boarding house owner from Bristol saw her image in the paper and ruined the whole production. She recognized her as Mary Baker, a cobbler's daughter from Devon who had stayed with her recently. The royal island, the language, the manners, all invented. Mary had not discovered a kingdom. She had discovered branding. 11. In the early 1700s, a man calling himself George Salmanazar arrived in London claiming to be from Formosa, now Taiwan, and proceeded to feed English society one of the most outrageous fake travel stories ever printed. According to him, Formosans ate raw meat, sometimes human flesh, worshipped the sun and moon, and sacrificed 18,000 young boys' hearts every year. Did this sound suspicious? Obviously. Did London love it anyway? Also, obviously, he invented a full alphabet and grammar for his fake Formosan language, then published a bestseller called An Historical and Geographical Description of Formosa. Oxford invited him to lecture. The Church of England supported his work. This man was basically running an imaginary country with footnotes. The fraud finally cracked when a Jesuit missionary who actually knew Asia challenged him in public. Salmanazar was probably French and had never been near Taiwan. Decades later, he confessed and spent his old age writing a remorseful memoir, which is a very literary way to say, my bad. 12. In the 1990s, Stephen Glass looked like the future of elite political journalism. At the New Republic, one of America's most respected magazines, he wrote stories so colorful, specific, and perfectly dramatic that editors and readers kept rewarding him. There were hackers blackmailing companies, young conservatives acting like political frat boys, lobbying scandals with dialogue that seemed almost too cinematic. That is because much of it was not journalism. It was fan fiction wearing a press badge. Glass invented quotes, sources, organizations, scenes, and entire events. When fact-checkers got suspicious, he built fake websites and arranged fake voicemail messages like a man creating a haunted house for editors. In 1998, a Forbes reporter noticed that a company in one of his stories seemed not to exist, then kept pulling the thread. The whole thing unraveled. Of 42 pieces he published at the New Republic, nearly all contained fabrications. He did not just lie in articles. He built a fake reality and submitted it on deadline. 13. Victor Lustig may be the closest history ever got to a con artist with luxury packaging. In 1925, he read that the Eiffel Tower was expensive to maintain, and where normal people saw a maintenance problem, Lustig saw a business opportunity from hell. He forged government papers, posed as a French official, and invited 6 scrap metal dealers to a private meeting. With a straight face, he explained that the government was secretly selling the Eiffel Tower for scrap. One dealer, André Poisson, paid both the purchase price and a huge bribe to secure the deal. By the time Poisson realized he had bought a national monument from a man with no authority whatsoever, Lustig had already fled. And because apparently one Eiffel Tower was not enough, he returned to Paris and tried the same scam again on a different buyer. He also once tricked Al Capone out of $50,000, which requires either genius, madness, or both wearing a nice suit. 14. Aleister Crowley called himself the Beast 666, the wickedest man in the world, and the Prophet of Thelema, a new religious movement built around his very dramatic personality. He claimed a supernatural being had dictated a holy book to him in Cairo, said he had mastered ancient magical secrets, and generally behaved like a man who had mistaken bad publicity for oxygen. In Sicily, he founded the Abbey of Thelema, where newspapers eagerly reported rumors of rituals involving meditation, sex, drugs, and even animal sacrifice. British tabloids hated him, which only made him more famous, because scandal was basically his marketing department. Behind the occult theater, much of Crowley's magic functioned as performance, recruitment, and a way to attract wealthy followers who could fund the lifestyle. He burned through inheritances, depended on believers, and died nearly broke in a Hastings boarding house in 1947. His doctor supposedly died within a day of being cursed by him. Magic or coincidence? Either way, very on brand. 15. In 1906, Wilhelm Voigt committed a crime so perfectly Prussian it almost salutes itself. Voigt was an unemployed cobbler with a criminal record and absolutely no military authority. But he bought a used captain's uniform from a second-hand shop, stepped into the street, and began ordering real soldiers around. They obeyed him because the uniform had spoken, and apparently that was enough. Voigt gathered a tiny borrowed squad, marched to the town hall in Köpenick near Berlin, arrested the mayor in the name of the Kaiser, and calmly took more than 4,000 marks from the treasury. By the time anyone realized no actual captain had ordered any of this, Voigt had changed clothes and disappeared. He was arrested 10 days later, but the story was so absurd that even Kaiser Wilhelm II reportedly laughed. Voigt served less than 2 years and became a folk hero. The lesson was brutal. In Imperial Germany, a uniform could do half the thinking for you. 16. Count Alessandro de Cagliostro swept through 18th century Europe claiming he could transform lead into gold, heal diseases, and brew an elixir of eternal youth. In other words, he offered rich people exactly what rich people always want: more money, more life, and preferably no consequences. His real name was Giuseppe Balsamo, a Sicilian petty criminal who discovered that aristocrats would pay beautifully for mystical nonsense wrapped in confidence. He founded Masonic lodges, staged dramatic healing ceremonies, and attracted followers from fashionable society. Then he became entangled in the affair of the diamond necklace, a scandal involving a wildly expensive necklace, forged claims, and Marie Antoinette's reputation getting dragged into a luxury disaster. Cagliostro was locked in the Bastille and eventually cleared of that specific accusation, but the scandal exposed enough of his tricks to damage him permanently. Later, the Roman Inquisition arrested him for Freemasonry. He was sentenced to life and died in a fortress prison in 1795, still not immortal, which was awkward for the brand. 17. In 1956, The Third Eye became a sensation. Its author, Tuesday Lobsang Rampa, claimed to be a Tibetan Lama who had undergone a mystical operation that opened his third eye, allowing him to see auras and past lives. The book gave Western readers vivid scenes of monastery life, sacred rituals, and ancient spiritual training. People were fascinated. Publishers were thrilled. Skeptics, inconveniently, existed. A private investigator hired by a doubtful publisher tracked the mysterious Tibetan master to suburban England and discovered he was Cyril Henry Hoskin, a plumber's son from Devon who had never visited Tibet and did not speak Tibetan. When confronted, Hoskin did not collapse into shame. No, he upgraded the lie. He said the spirit of a Tibetan monk had entered his body after he fell from a tree. That is not an apology. That is a sequel. He kept writing as Lobsang Rampa for decades, and readers kept buying the books. Apparently, even exposed fraud can have excellent sales if the story is weird enough. 18. The Count of Saint-Germain moved through 18th century Europe like a man written by someone who refused to choose a genre. He appeared in Paris around 1748, spoke multiple languages, played the violin brilliantly, mixed with nobles, and calmly claimed he was thousands of years old. He said he had known Jesus Christ, attended the wedding at Cana, and chatted with the Queen of Sheba, Because why stop at one impossible reference when you can collect the whole Bible-adjacent set? He also claimed to possess an elixir of youth. The strangest thing is that important people kept inviting him back. Voltaire called him the man who never dies and knows everything. He entered the court of Louis XV, carried out shadowy diplomatic missions, vanished, and reappeared with suspiciously good timing. Official records say he died in 1784, but alleged sightings continued into the 19th century. Whether he was a spy, genius, fraud, or professional mystery, nobody has fully pinned him down. 19. Cassie Chadwick, born Elizabeth Bigley in rural Ontario, started scamming young and eventually turned deception into a financial art form. Her greatest trick began when she arranged for a Cleveland lawyer to see her leaving Andrew Carnegie's New York mansion. Carnegie was the richest man in America, so this was not a casual backdrop. She then let the lawyer discover a forged promissory note for millions, supposedly signed by Carnegie. Soon, Cleveland bankers were whispering that Cassie was Carnegie's secret illegitimate daughter and future heiress. She never clearly confirmed it. She never denied it either. She simply let greed do the heavy lifting. Banks lent her massive sums, worth roughly $10 to $20 million today, because apparently asking Carnegie one direct question felt too socially awkward. When the fraud collapsed in 1904, several banks went down with it. Cassie received 10 years in prison and died there in 1907. She proved that confidence plus other people's embarrassment can become a banking crisis. 20. In late 19th century France, Thérèse Humbert told society she had inherited 100 million francs from a mysterious American millionaire named Robert Henry Crawford. Conveniently, the fortune was locked inside a safe in her home and could not be opened until a legal dispute was settled. This is the kind of explanation that should make every banker sweat. Instead, they nodded politely and gave her money. For 20 years, Humbert borrowed millions using the sealed fortune as collateral. She hosted lavish parties, wore luxurious clothes, mingled with politicians and aristocrats, and lived like a woman whose safe was full of treasure, rather than a woman whose story was doing Olympic-level gymnastics. Finally, in 1902, investigators forced the safe open. Inside, they found an old newspaper, a copper coin, and one trouser button. Not bonds, not jewels. A button. Humbert and her family fled to Spain, were caught, and went to prison. France had been financially hypnotized by furniture. 21. Christian Gerhardt's came from Germany to the United States in 1978 and spent the next 30 years treating identity like a costume rack. He posed as a British aristocrat, a Wall Street professional, a physics researcher, and finally created his most successful character. Clark Rockefeller, supposed member of one of America's most famous families. As Clark, he married Sandra Boss, a Harvard-educated McKinsey executive, and had a daughter with her. For years, he moved through elite circles even though no actual Rockefeller knew who he was, which seems like a small clerical issue when your entire name is Rockefeller. After Boss divorced him and received custody, Gerhardt's kidnapped their daughter during a supervised visit in 2008, triggering a nationwide manhunt. Then the case became darker. Investigators linked him to a 1985 California murder. He was later convicted of kidnapping and murder. The fake aristocrat act ended not with embarrassment, but with a prison sentence and a body count. 22. The Chevalier d'Eon lived one of the most extraordinary double lives of 18th century Europe. d'Eon served King Louis XV of France as a diplomat, soldier, and spy, fought in the 7 Years' War, and earned decorations for bravery. For the first part of life, d'Eon lived publicly as a man while handling political missions that already sounded dangerous enough. Then, in the 1770s, d'Eon began living publicly as a woman. King Louis XVI even issued a decree requiring women's clothing, turning personal identity into royal paperwork, because monarchy could make anything bureaucratic. London gambling houses became obsessed and took huge bets on d'Eon's sex, with wagers worth vast sums today. d'Eon lived the final 33 years as a woman. After death in 1810, doctors recorded an anatomically male body and were reportedly stunned. The life was so famous that psychologists later coined Eonism as an early term linked to cross-gender identification. 23. Frank Abagnale became world-famous as the teenage supercon artist behind Catch Me If You Can. In his own telling, before age 21, he impersonated a Pan Am pilot, a hospital doctor, and a Louisiana prosecutor, while cashing millions in forged checks across 26 countries. It is a perfect movie story. Charming criminal genius outruns everyone while wearing excellent uniforms. The problem is that recent investigations have made that story look a lot less solid. Journalists and researchers found little evidence that he ever flew as a pilot, worked as a doctor, passed a bar exam, or pulled off the massive globe-trotting career he described. His real crimes appear to have been much smaller, messier, and less glamorous than the legend. So the world's most famous liar may have lied about being better at lying than he really was. That is not just irony. That is a hall of mirrors with a fake badge at the door. 24. For nearly 30 years, Enric Marco stood before audiences in Spain and across Europe describing his supposed survival in a Nazi concentration camp. He became president of the Amical de Mauthausen, Spain's leading association for concentration camp survivors. He spoke at memorials, addressed the Spanish parliament, and became a public symbol of memory for victims of fascism. Then in 2005, historian Benito Bermejo exposed the truth. Marco had been in Germany during the war, but as a voluntary worker, not a concentration camp prisoner. The stories of guards, hunger, terror, and camp suffering were invented. This was not a cheeky identity trick or a harmless social scam. It was a theft of pain. Marco used the real suffering of actual survivors to build authority, sympathy, and public importance around himself. The exposure was devastating because it damaged trust around a history that already carries unimaginable weight. Among modern cases of stolen valor, his remains one of the ugliest. 25. For almost 50 years, Dr. James Barry served as one of the British Empire's most respected military surgeons. Barry performed one of the first successful cesarean sections in Africa in 1826, where both mother and child survived, which at the time was astonishing. Barry also fought for cleaner hospitals, challenged poor medical conditions, clashed with Florence Nightingale, and rose to Inspector General. Barry was short, had a high voice, and guarded personal privacy with fierce intensity, especially when ill. When Barry died in 1865, the person preparing the body for burial discovered that the famous doctor had been born female. Barry had lived as a man since entering the University of Edinburgh Medical School as a teenager, and maintained that identity through decades of military service across the empire. In a world where women were barred from that education and career, Barry built an entire life behind a locked door and changed medicine from the other side of it. 26. Ferdinand Waldo de Mera was called the Great Impostor, and honestly, history was not being dramatic. He had no college degree, no medical training, and no real professional credentials, yet he successfully posed as a surgeon aboard a Royal Canadian Navy destroyer during the Korean War. Even worse, or more horrifyingly impressive, he performed actual operations on wounded soldiers, including removing a bullet lodged near a man's heart. He also pretended to be a civil engineer, sheriff's deputy, prison warden, college professor, and Trappist monk. His method was almost insulting in its simplicity. Steal the identity of a real professional, study intensely, act confident, and hope nobody asked the one question that would destroy everything. Somehow, it usually worked. He was exposed after the mother of one of his patients saw his photograph in a newspaper and recognized him from a different fake life. Imagine being caught because your resume had too many costumes. 27. In the 1820s, Scottish soldier Gregor MacGregor entered London society and declared himself Prince of Poyais, a prosperous Central American nation that sounded like a colonial investor's dream. He had maps. He had a flag. He printed currency. He sold land. London banks issued bonds for the country because apparently geography could be outsourced to vibes. Around 250 hopeful settlers bought into the fantasy and sailed across the Atlantic to begin new lives. When they arrived, they found no capital, no government buildings, no harbor, no thriving colony. Just jungle, swamp, insects, disease, and the crushing realization that their prince had sold them a country that did not exist. More than 150 people died from starvation and illness before rescue came. MacGregor was briefly arrested in France, somehow acquitted, and then returned to selling Poyet's land again. He did not just invent a fake identity. He invented a fake nation and found repeat customers. 28. In 1726, Mary Toft, a woman from rural England, convinced doctors that she was giving birth to rabbits. Not one rabbit, as a strange rumor. Multiple rabbits, over several weeks, with medical men seriously standing around like nature had just filed a very confusing complaint. The story spread fast, and King George I sent his own surgeon to investigate. The royal physician examined her, watched what appeared to be rabbit parts being delivered, and reported that the miracle was real. Newspapers went wild. London became obsessed. Then someone caught a porter sneaking a rabbit into her room, which is usually a sign that the miracle has some logistical support. Under pressure, Mary confessed that she had been inserting dead rabbit parts into herself. The scandal wrecked the reputation of the royal surgeon and made British medicine look like it had been outsmarted by a farmyard horror show. History remembers Mary Toft because sometimes the human body lies, and sometimes doctors help it publish. 29. Han van Meegeren was a Dutch painter who felt mocked and ignored by the art world, so he chose revenge with a paintbrush and terrifying patience. He studied the techniques of Johannes Vermeer, mastered the style, aged his materials, and began creating brand new, lost Vermeers that fooled experts. His forged The Supper at Emmaus was praised as one of Vermeer's greatest discoveries, which must have been delicious for a man quietly laughing behind the canvas. During World War II, he sold paintings to Nazi buyers, including Hermann Göring. After the war, Dutch authorities arrested him for collaborating by selling national treasures to the enemy, a charge that could have meant death. So Van Meegeren revealed the punchline. The masterpieces were fake, and he had painted them. Nobody believed him. To prove it, he painted another Vermeer in front of officials. The treason charge became forgery, and for a brief moment, the Netherlands admired him for conning Nazis with fake art. 30. For decades, Grey Owl was celebrated as one of the most powerful indigenous voices in conservation. He lived in the Canadian wilderness, wore buckskin, braided his long dark hair, wrote best-selling books about nature, and gave packed lectures across Canada and Britain. He even performed for King George VI at Buckingham Palace. His work helped protect the Canadian beaver, and he became a global symbol of wilderness wisdom. Then he died in 1938, and the secret came out almost immediately. Grey Owl was actually Archibald Stansfeld Bellany, born in Hastings, England. He had moved to Canada at 17, gradually adopted an indigenous identity, and built the persona over years. The scandal was enormous because the identity was fabricated. But the legacy is complicated. His conservation work was real. The beavers he protected were real. The policy changes were real. Grey Owl was a fraud who still helped save wildlife, which is exactly the kind of morally messy footnote history loves to drop on the table and walk away. 31. Juan Pujol. Garcia may be the greatest liar ever to serve a good cause. During World War II, this Spanish chicken farmer offered to spy against Nazi Germany for British intelligence. The British rejected him, which must rank among history's more awkward missed calls. So Pujol went to the Germans instead, convinced them he was a loyal Nazi agent, and began sending reports from Britain, a country he had never visited. He made everything up using tourist guides, maps, and newsreels. Eventually, British intelligence realized what he was doing and recruited him for real, giving him the codename Garbo. With his handlers, he created a network of 27 imaginary sub-agents, each feeding false information to Berlin. Before the D-Day landings, Garbo convinced the Germans that Normandy was only a diversion and the real invasion would strike at Pas de Calais. Hitler believed enough of it to hold back reserve divisions. Pujol received medals from both Germany and Britain, which is what happens when lying becomes international performance art. 32. Around 1600, a teenage girl named Catalina de Erauso escaped from a convent in Spain's Basque country, cut her hair, bound her chest, and began living as a young man. But this was not a quiet disappearing act. Catalina joined the Spanish army, crossed the Atlantic, and spent roughly 15 years in South America as a soldier and conquistador. She fought against the Mapuche in Chile, survived violence, got into knife fights, killed men in duels, and developed a reputation as a fearless and dangerous fighter. Nobody suspected the truth for years. The secret emerged only after Catalina, badly wounded and thinking death was near, confessed to a bishop. When the story reached Spain, the reaction was not punishment but fascination. Catalina became famous, and the Pope granted permission to keep wearing men's clothing. Later, Catalina lived in Mexico as a mule driver. The autobiography known as The Lieutenant Nun reads like a 17th-century action film that somehow passed through a convent door first. So here is the real test. Which fraud from history was too insane to leave out? Drop the name in the comments, but do not bring some weak little "he lied on a form" nonsense. I want industrial-grade identity fraud. Fake royalty, fake heroes, fake countries. The kind of lie that makes historians close the book and stare at a wall. And if even one of these stories made you question humanity's relationship with truth, hit like and subscribe, because apparently history is just crime with better costumes.